Welcome back to the Entrepreneurial Edge. I'm Chris Bishop. Now, as always, we continue to welcome your feedback and suggestions. So feel free to send me an email to entrep@abn360.com or contact us via Twitter @EntrePEdge. Still with us in the studio is William Jimerson, the co-founder of Musa Capital. Before we carry on our discussion, let's take a quick look at one of their investees in Africa, Frontier Holdings.
Musa Capital invests across 6 sectors, being telecommunication, financial services, mining, construction, renewable energy, and consumer goods. One of Musa's success stories is African Frontier Holdings, a consumer foods group which focuses on the food industry through franchise supermarkets, restaurants, as well as food manufacturing.
We met African Frontier in sort of late 2008. The company, or the entrepreneurs then, were introduced to us by one of our contacts that we have, and we met them when they had a business plan and were looking to expand and needed some funding to expand that. So after a few negotiations, we finally invested about 52 million rand in the company in late 2008. At the time, the company was doing kind of 70 million in turnover, had about 50 employees, so it was relatively smallish company. Now that investment for us has done superbly well. The company has grown now to about turnover of 675 million, and they employ about 1,200 people now.
African Frontier Holdings CEO Michael Prinsloo gave us a bit of a background between the partnership.
Musa Capital invested in the holdings company in 2008, and they gave us a clear mandate of what they wanted to achieve, and that is to be the solution for the missing middle. So where there are growth opportunities, but for companies that aren't necessarily on the radar of larger private equity schemes or the merchant banks, but had a good business plan and strong jockeys.
Musa invested 57 million rand into African Frontier Holdings, of which 20 odd million was used for the acquisition of African Dynamics, a food manufacturing company.
African Dynamics focuses on contract manufacturing for a number of different clients. 2 main client segments. First is feeding schemes, where we are manufacturing on behalf of a third party, generally clients that can't manage to pay for themselves, that are nutrition deficient or part of a government feeding scheme or an NGO feeding scheme. And then we also distribute to those clients, very fragmented client base throughout South Africa and parts of Africa as well. And then contract manufacturing for retail clients, such as the large retail stores, where we manufacture some of their private label products.
African Frontier Holdings is one of Musa Capital's success stories, although not all their investments always worked out as planned.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, with African Frontier is one of the success stories where everything has been aligned, and the capital and the entrepreneurs have come together, and the business has done well. We do have another company based in Zambia, the Transport and Logistics. They do mostly asset transport for the copper mines in the Copper Belt region. So in 2008, 2009, when there was a global slowdown, that hit the company quite hard. So we saw a contraction in demand for copper. Some of the mines started sort of shrinking their output, and because we're directly linked to how copper does, the business suffered because of that. So that's been one of the stories that have been a more difficult investment. We've subsequently restructured the business, refocused it on sort of its core competencies, and we're weathering through right now.
So still in the studio with me, I have William Jimerson, the co-founder of Musa Capital. That's what you do, but the great story is how you got to that point, how you started your business. Now, at this stage, you're a young investment banker. There are a few of you together now, but you had nothing apart from your suit and the shoes you stood up in. How did you get there? Who did you convince and how to put up the money to start this?
Well, the story, Chris, is that one of the things that we brought to the table, myself particularly, is that we had an entrepreneurial spirit of not saying die. If you gave us 30 seconds, we'd pitch you, and we'd tell you our vision and why and how we were going to execute it, and why you should give us anything from $1 million to $500 million to do it. My Wall Street training, I can credit some of that back to my grandmother's upbringing. So this first trip in Zim was at one of our good friends' houses in Harare, and at the time he was dating a young lady who had a sister married to who turned out to be one of the advisors of one of the most richest men on the planet, Prince Al-Walid. Now, I didn't know this going in, and so we're talking basketball, and he's a U.S. citizen, so we're talking U.S. basketball and football, and what I'm doing in Africa, and why we're meeting in such a strange place. And so that was an opportunity for me to pitch him. At the end of that conversation, and it was more practice for me than anything else, because I was just programmed that I'm following my dream, and so I've got to use every opportunity to pursue it. It turned out, he said to me, you know what, I believe my benefactor, my principal, would love to hear what you all have to say. He's interested in Africa. He has a little balance sheet to throw at it. At the time, I think Forbes listed him at about $25 billion of net worth, so he had a little balance sheet. So he said to us, 3 weeks from now, meet us in Dallas. We'll be there doing some business, and you can bring your team down and pitch us. So we did that. We cobbled the pennies together and pulled the full team, myself and my other two partners, two founders of the business. And so we ended up meeting in an airplane hangar. The first destination should have been the Four Seasons in Dallas, which would have been a normal meeting place. Now, what I didn't know at the time is that the Prince actually owned the Four Seasons hotel chain. So anyway, we ended up meeting in the hangar. Why? Because he was having his newly purchased 747 retrofitted. So we walk into the penthouse suite in the hangar, and there's a cadre of the bodyguards and whatnot along the hallway. We walk into the main boardroom, and there's journalists there from Business Week, because they're doing a documentary on him, so there's TV cameras everywhere. It's the first time that's where I got my TV training. Arthur Anderson, they still existed back then because they were his right-hand man in terms of audit and accounting. So he had the chief partner in the Middle East sitting with him 24/7. And the head of Middle East investment banking for Citibank, because he's the largest shareholder in Citibank at the time. And so as the sea parted, I remember walking into the room and all the lights and so forth, and we're introducing. As the sea parted, here stood a guy who was maybe 5'3". Right? He's the smallest guy in the room, and the most fidgety guy in the room at the same time. I don't even think he looked us in the face. An hour into the session, he said to us, "I'll do it. I'll do it, but you got to change A, B, C, and D. Can you do that?" It took us all of 1 millisecond to say, "Absolutely, Your Highness."
But you got your money, you set up as we've seen on the film, but you had your problems too. There's a lot of publicity a couple of years ago. You were doing some work with Wasizwe Platinum here in South Africa, and there were accusations that your company was trying to buy shares and almost hijack the company. What was happening there?
Very challenging story. No positive stories as we heard from before. There's the African frontiers, a great story, and then there's the logistics companies in Zambia. There's always the ugly. So in short, very interesting situation. We were introduced to a community in the Northwest called the Bakubon. They actually were and still are the largest empowerment shareholder in Wasizwe Platinum. We were introduced to them by their CEO at the time, Mike Solomon. We knew Wasizwe because another part of our business that's run by my business partner is our advisory business. And so we were trying to raise money for Wasizwe and so forth in our corporate finance business. But Mike said to us, "Guys, I have a problem. I have a community as my largest shareholder. We went public in 2005, and today, and this is 2006, 2007, on paper, they're worth R1 billion. But there's school deficiency. The pass rate is 36% in the community. There are no roads, there's no water, there's no development, there's no small businesses, there's no job creation. It'll be R7 billion in another 10 years before I have a mine built. I need help, right?" And so we took on a mandate. Probably in retrospect, if you asked us again, we'd have to think about it twice, to do almost an unthinkable advisory assignment. We needed to raise the community money on a junior mining play that had no dividends for the next 10 years. We had to figure out when we did that how to allow them to have money for development and have funding to reinvest so they didn't get diluted as rights offerings went forward. And what they did as an asterisk, they said to us, we don't want to go the way of so many other communities in South Africa and across the continent, that when they found wealth and money got dropped in the middle of the living room, there were no institutions in place to manage it properly. So we helped build a Section 21 to do the development in the schools and so forth. So all is fine, you know, through 2008. Several institutions participated in that fundraising with us. We raised almost R1 billion, not necessarily for Wesizwe. Only about 200 million was earmarked to go into the company. The rest should have gone to empowerment shareholders. And it left those shareholders as controlling shareholders still in Wesizwe. So it was one of the best advisory deals of the decade, in our opinion. But that was when the trouble started.
Well, it must have been quite serious, because in January 2011, the Financial Services Board raided your offices.
Yeah.
I mean, surely it must have been serious.
No, it was very serious. But what we realized is that by empowering that community with financial resources and advisors and lawyers and so forth, now they were able to act empowered. And they took some note of some corporate governance issues within Wesizwe that they didn't like. And as a result of that, they fought back. And in August 2009, at the annual general meeting, they basically replaced the entire board, including Mike Solomon and the chairman at the time. You don't do that in South Africa to a mining company, because they fight back.
And there were no charges or anything like that?
There were no charges. There were no charges. There was investigations done. Iraj Ibrahim was brought in as an interim chairman. Literally, the community cleaned the boardroom. Yeah. What that resulted in was a boardroom fight. That fight, unfortunately, spilled over to the community. And so when that happened, it began to be a fight between one side of the community family and another side of the royal family. The FSB raid was the community's attorneys, unfortunately, filing claims that we hijacked Wesizwe, that we'd stolen money, that we'd stolen shares. And unfortunately, the story of Americans coming from overseas, making a lot of money with investment banking backgrounds, with very complex financial structures, taking advantage of a community, made good news. And I sat in front of the chief investigating officer at the FSB months before the FSB came to our offices, and he said to me, all the data seems to make sense, but we don't understand it. And you have to understand, from my constituency, which is government, if there's an inkling of possibility that you did any of this stuff that they say you did, I've got to investigate it.
One of the trials and troubles of being in the investment business. But William Jimerson, thank you very much, the co-founder of Musa Capital, for sharing your stories with us on this program. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for this week on the edition of Entrepreneurial Edge. Until next time, from me, Chris Bishop, it's goodbye.